What's up, Jesse? How you doing,
Oh,
man?
mhm.
So, yeah, let's get it started. It's a little late for certain parts of the country, but oh well, we do what we got to do. So, yeah, I'm Coach Kerr with the Alpha Scully Fight Team. We're doing two FMA nerds talking about stuff. I really got to work on that title, but I may never, but oh well. So, yeah, I got Jessie Santiago from FMA Pulse with me again, and we're just going to like hang out and bullshit because that's what we're going to do. Because this podcast is just that. So, yeah, what's up, man? How you been doing?
Just pretty much laying low. I think last time we spoke was almost like 2 months ago.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, I was in Puerto Rico for the FCS event in the Caribbean, and then I got back, and I'm like, I think I'm kind of burned out from all this traveling. I need to lay low for a while.
Yeah, for real. I totally feel that because I did Washington twice in 1 month. I mean, I was there for, yeah, I had a 2 week space in between. And yeah, that's tiresome. It's nothing compared to like what you do, like how much you travel. So yeah, I totally feel you on that one.
Yeah.
So where have you been, like in all your travels? Talking about that, we all know you went down to Puerto Rico, but what else have you been up to?
I mean, as of now, like I've just been editing all the stuff from the Philippines from earlier in the year.
Yeah,
Uh, just focusing on that because I'm trying to get everything done by end of December. And then I interviewed like a few instructors in Illinois before I left, so I'm trying to get that done for early next year. So
nice.
pretty much just doing freelance gigs outside of martial arts, and then editing whenever I have time to. So just trying to keep things consistent at the moment.
Oh, cool. Yeah, so uh, we're both FMA content creators. Um, do you ever feel like, I mean, things go up and down in waves? Because, I mean, when you're constantly hard at it, constantly going after and talking to people, and you have the moment to take a break, do you feel like sometimes, like, I've done it, I've done all the things, and what takes you through that process to get to back to the work or getting re-inspired to go out and see somebody new and film something new?
I mean, there's always something out there. It's just trying to line up the schedules between me and them. That's always the challenge. Everything is um, it's difficult too because every traveling, boarding, it all costs money.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
we I try to be concise and trying to line up our schedules with whoever I'm going to be meeting, so nothing happens in terms of like wasted time. Um,
Right.
but yeah, I mean it's there's always content out there in
Hmm.
terms of what I can create in a documentary or vlog sense. It's just like how I shape the story for each person that I meet or whatever group that I meet. Uh,
Right.
there's always going to be content there. It's just you know, as the artist, I guess that whatever I do as a video producer, it just happens when it happens.
Yeah.
And as of now, I think I'm good until probably mid next year in terms of the content that I have at the moment. And then just checking out my students in Chicago and the Bay Area, um, and then teaching them online. And if they're able to fly me out, then we'll do in person training. Um,
Nice.
but I really haven't had a chance to start anything here in Arizona yet because I've barely been here.
Yeah, that's fair. Well,
um,
do you want to start something there in Arizona? I mean, with your work schedule and everything of traveling, it's hard to like have a consistent basis. Plus, you have students and requirements elsewhere. Do you find that you may actually not have time to do that there, or I mean, do you have a drive for necessarily to start up shop there?
I mean, along like all the my inspiration is just like all the other traveling instructors.
Yeah.
Um, Giambobby,
Oh yeah.
Ray. It's they do this, they travel, and then they set up camps, training
Yeah.
camp in whatever city that they're in, and they just periodically drop in on them for like seminars or if they want privates one on one.
Yeah.
And uh, it's one of my things that I want to do too because it's weird. I get even though I'm kind of burnt out from traveling, I get antsy where I'm like I feel like I should be out doing something, like not
Yeah.
staying still. But yeah, I mean, if I could travel and teach, not just within the United States but globally, I'm down for doing that. It's like, I don't want to stay put for too long, but I mean, I do want to create a group, um, and for me, being a teacher and someone that's going to guide them, because I want to teach them as much as they can do on their own, because with a lot of things that's going on, you don't know when your time is going to be up. So I'm like,
Mhm.
oh my guys, I'm like, dude, like a lot of our friends have passed away, um,
Yeah.
and you guys, like, I want to put this information on you, but not shove it down your throat. But if you're gonna take this seriously, you got to step up
Yep.
your. And in case something happens to me, of course, leave the, I'm gonna leave someone in charge that's going to take the reins and the responsibilities, who I feel like could handle that task.
Oh, that's awesome. Because I mean, it is. I find that there's, to use movies. Okay, there's two archetypes that we see in the movies with the older martial arts instructor. You got the Mr. Miyagi, who's got the setup in the backyard, and then you got the traveling salesman. And what I'm finding with the FMA community, it ends up being the traveling instructor, the nomad instructor, is actually like the more consistent common one. I mean, because if you look at like the way GT, GM Bobby, GM Angel Cabales, um, Professor Remy Presas, I mean, they were all just traveling GMs that are just out there doing the stuff, living the life of an FMA nomad, setting up little seeds here and there throughout the country and throughout the world. But um, it's very interesting to see if they'll. With some of them, they developed a home base, but it's really interesting to see which way a person will go. Because I mean, traveling doing seminars is a lot of fun. It can be. It's like traveling going to fights is a lot of fun, but like you said, it's a lot of time on the road. So Brian says hi and
Good
good night.
night, guys. What's up, Brian? All right. Yeah, I mean,
Peter says hi too.
hey, Peter's here. Team Canada's in the house.
Yes, sir.
But yeah, I mean, in terms of, I was talking with my friend about this, Joseph Bautista out in the Bay Area, who has his own
Mhm.
school, and when we were just hanging out, chilling, and he was saying, well, he said you could approach this two ways. Either you set up shop and you anchor yourself in one location and build your community that way locally, or you do what all the other GMs are doing, and that's following. I mean, that's pretty much traveling. That's how
Yeah.
in terms of a business, either set up a brick and mortar or you do your
Mhm.
nomadic traveling seminars.
Yeah, and it's a matter of like cost and risk because I mean I had a brick and mortar for quite a long time, and I was established in my little small town of Homer for quite a long time. But again, the risk or the problem that I ran into is by scale because I mean there's only a town of like 5 to 7,000, and our population influx during the school year and summertime, and so there was like this high peaks and lows, but it was always consistent no matter what of my population base was the rent was always due, the landlord didn't care. And so with that, I always had that I had to meet the bottom line. With traveling, I mean, there is less of that overhead, immediate overhead of a bottom line of you got to pay your rent, you got to pay your utilities, you got to pay your staff. But if you're not out hustling, you're not making money. And I mean, the incurring cost of just traveling in general is that other side of it. So I don't know. It's one of those things like it's not one is better than the other. It's just it's interesting that they're both different and how well a person can succeed at one or the other.
Yeah, and if you could sustain it long term,
Yeah.
especially retirement age, because like even the top instructors, they're commanding anywhere from what 2 to 5 grand per seminar,
Yeah.
because people don't know that you have to cover the hotel cost, you got to cover their
Hmm.
food, rates, their time, um,
Hmm.
and it's going to rack up. Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to put any names out there, but yeah, I mean, the top guys can command anywhere from 2 to 5 grand for a weekend, and like, shoot,
Yep.
that's what most people make in a month. So
Yeah. Yeah. It is. But again, like all the work to go after that dollar, the hustle like that. I mean, you have to have that credibility and then maintain that positive like public atmosphere to maintain that heavy student base and making sure that you're in touch with everybody and coordinating with everybody. I find with especially with the digital age of the internet where we have a greater opportunity for networking. But does that actually mean people are going to be there with butts in the seminar? Because you may have a lot of like excellent advertising and marketing, but does that actually mean people will show up, especially with all the Zoom seminars that are so available?
Yeah, I mean, it's with social media, it's become so saturated now,
Yeah,
and if you're not a top name, you kind of get drowned out in
yeah,
terms, who's popular. Um, and like for me, it's just like there's so much out there, like different instructors that's promoting, FMA in their system.
hmm,
But what really connects them is, people can relate to them for some reason. Either
oh
they're
yeah,
either they're a good salesman, or they're a good martial artist. It's like, how do you stand out amongst like all these people on social media, especially the young generation that knows how to, um, use algorithms to their advantage.
yeah. The thing is, though, with like the younger generation, I'm talking about 35 and below, is they may have the skill set on the online to push out content, play the algorithm, and have all the great like flashy one-sided approach because it's what we see on a screen. But the real question is, can they command the presence and the attention of a live audience? Can they command the presence of being able to work with on the fly with who and whatever comes in? Because I mean that's an experience thing. Because I really wonder with this next generation of FMA instructors that they have some really big shoes to fill. I mean, to include myself, I have some big shoes to fill if I want to maintain this job, this lifestyle.
Yeah.
So I can imagine you have the same pressure as well.
Well, yeah, I mean, a lot of my friends too, like
Yeah.
a lot of people don't know, like a lot of the martial artists, especially the really talented ones, they still have their day jobs and
Yep.
they teach FMA on the side. It's not really their full time thing, and it's difficult, because if you're hustling and nothing, you're not reaping the rewards.
Hmm.
Comes to the point you're like, shoot, it's like I gotta start saving up for retirement, like all this stuff, and all these things start popping in your mind, and $100 there, $100 there for like privates, that's good enough to get you food, but
Yeah.
a roof over your head. So it's challenging. But then again, it's like the passion is still there. I have a friend in Ohio, and he was saying that, he has a day job, but he just does that job so it could pay for his hobbies, which is FMA classes. So
That makes sense. That yeah, I can appreciate that. Yeah, that's yeah, because I mean we have an expensive hobby. I mean just to travel alone is expensive to go and do seminars. Because I mean like even in my retirement, being fully medically retired, I'm allowed the time and opportunity, but it's still money. It's still time. I mean going down to Seattle twice in 1 month was not cheap. So yeah, for the people who do this as a hobby and does it consistently, I mean, I'm glad they have a decent job to pay for this very expensive combative habit that we have. So it's unlike like growing up down the lower 48 when I was younger, where we would just drive to tournaments, drive to seminars. It was really easy. So yeah, yeah, Brandon's right. Talking about tournaments.
tournaments, yeah, I mean
Yeah.
it. Yeah, I mean it's especially with the tactical guys, all the guns and all the
Oh
tactical,
yeah, all
their
their kit.
uniform
Yeah.
fit right there. But it's just, yeah, I mean it's tough because a lot of my friends, they still have their day jobs.
Hmm.
For me, it was like I freelance doing video work, so I pretty much will work wherever they'll need me, and I do work remotely as well, and
Yeah.
that funds my travels for FMA Pulse. So it's I love doing that digital nomad lifestyle,
Yeah.
where I'm like, okay, I have my work that can supplement. my passion for FMA
Yeah.
Pulse and training as well. Um, but it comes to the point where it's like it's like how much longer can uh, people keep doing this because the formula changes. Like, are you in a relationship? Are you married?
Hmm.
Do you have
Hmm.
it's like do you have to start taking care of your parents because they're getting older? All these factors start coming in later
Yeah.
on.
Yeah. I mean, getting everything lined up to do the things that we want to do is a tricky balance. And for people who are actually in that wonderful window of everything's working out for them, my suggestion, my recommendations, enjoy it while it lasts. Just like the window of competition is such a small window to actually be operating as a full time competitor athlete at peak. Cherish that time because it's such a small window. And I mean, life and stuff just catches up, anyways. So,
Yeah,
but yeah,
my buddy's
and like,
in Seattle, and he just found out he's about to become a father,
oh,
and
nice, congrats to him.
like tell him like, oh well, say goodbye to your training.
Yeah, yeah, and sleep and sleep. Yeah, that's crazy. Yeah, it's so like the thing that I found now, since I mean I don't have the gym anymore and I have a lot of time. Yeah, I have a lot of time to do stuff, a lot of time to be involved and do things like this, but I don't actually get a lot of like one on. I do a fair amount of training with a few of my guys, like Cooper, for example, but I don't get like the wide variety of training and networking with my team, with all my students, and also with my peers here in the state because I'm not as actively networking with them locally as I was a few years ago because I don't have the gym. But I have this new phase where I'm able to interact with my other peers, such as yourself, in this digital space. But the things that I lack, though, is that hands-on, day in, day out, every day, putting putting sweat equity in the ring. So it's a fun, it's an odd balance. Is basically what I'm getting at. So
I mean, that's my too. It's just between being a video producer and training and teaching is just that constant act of
yeah,
should I focus on one area? Um, because like when they say like when you want to do more than one thing, focus on one thing first before you go on.
mhm, yeah,
Uh, the same thing with my training. Like I don't mind cross training, but if I want to learn a system, I'm gonna be focused on that system before I go on
yeah.
to the next. But yeah, I mean, it's constantly juggling, and sometimes the motivation to edit videos is like, oh, I have to get next week's content ready or next month's content ready, and like on a creative sense, it burns you up.
Oh yeah, it's more than just the video editing. I mean, it's the write-ups because you're writing essays. Quite literally, you're writing essays all the time to match with the video work.
Yeah,
So, I mean, unless you can be like the people who just throw out a single statement and let the video speak for itself. For those, I mean, that's awesome. But there's a lot of us that also want to say the context, even though nobody reads it. But it makes us feel better when we write our context, just in case that one person does read it. But yeah, you're writing essays all the time. Not to mention editing video all the time. So
yeah. I've been taking a break this month. I mean, when I edited Sonny Sisson's interview, like he was more of a cultural context interview as opposed to
yeah,
arts. And I'm like, I need a break before I get started on the next instructor. So I'm like, let me just do vlogs because I got a lot of B-roll
yeah.
uh, in the Philippines. So I'm hopefully trying to drop at least one or two this week
Oh,
before I get
nice.
this content ready.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, I finally actually watched the Sony System video the other day, as evident by our commenting back and forth on YouTube. And the thing that, I mean, people have some issues with him, as many people have issues with many other people. But the fact is, he did make some really great points, and I will always have a certain bit of fanboy loyalty to him because of Power Rangers and Ninja Turtles. It's just that's a fact. So aside from that, I mean, he made some really good points about Filipinos. Let's have our day in the cinema because it's thoroughly possible. I just don't know why it hasn't happened. I mean, I can imagine many reasons why, but we still need that representation, especially in a world where we talk about representation as being an important part of our society. Filipinos, we need a Filipino action star.
Yeah.
We need a representation of a bioptic of a historical event, or even just like the Filipino history and Filipino storyline, because we have an awesome, rich history and culture. So why not showcase it?
Yeah.
So
And
I don't know.
my
So
friend
anybody,
said like the interview was good. Thank you.
yep, yep.
Yeah, I mean, that was the first time I met Sonny Cecil. Like, and it was funny because when he released the Bladed Hand documentary back in 2012, and they
Yeah.
were tour, when they screened it in Chicago, I was part of the FMA demo team, but
Oh, nice.
I didn't meet him in Chicago because basically we went in, did our demo, watched the movie, and then we dipped to go eat somewhere. So
Yeah, as Filipinos do.
yeah,
Nice.
yeah.
That was a good documentary as well. I appreciate that one. Referencing that one all the time.
Well, and that's the thing. It's just like the quality of information has to be important as well.
Hmm.
Doors was also a good one.
Yep.
Fight Barnice was good.
Yep.
Uh, but then you don't see those type of documentaries often. Uh,
So,
so when I do the interviews, I want each one of them to be a documentary highlight of the instructor.
yeah.
So it makes them look good because when you look at all the other martial arts that come from China, Japan, Korea, cinematography, fight choreography, even the magazine write-ups, it's really done well.
Hmm.
I didn't know about this, but did you know there was a Filipino martial arts magazine in like the late 80s, early 90s?
Yeah, I do. There.
And the thing is, it's like what happened to it. And basically what they said, like, one is that they ran out of content.
Mhm.
And then two was like it cost money to print magazines in color.
Oh
Uh,
yeah.
so even though print media is kind of like DVDs, it's kind of dead, but it's hard, like especially if you don't have constant support within the FMA community to keep providing you information.
Oh yeah. I mean, like FMA Informative. Do you remember that from back in the early 2000s?
Oh yeah, yep,
I mean, that was a printed medium, and I remember them releasing it out on online, saying, "Hey, we're done," because I mean the intrinsic cost of it, and just like there's not enough content. It's like, well, there's tons of content. It's just really what happens is the people who are producing the stuff gets burnt out because that's definitely a thing. So,
yeah,
and it's unfortunate because I mean, just even relevant to like within the scope of FMA Online, anyways. I mean, Dean Franco took a break, took a mental health break, which is great for him. And but there was a real risk of him going away completely. There just was. Fortunately, he came back. So, but still, when something like that goes away, we lose so much data and so much momentum and so much opportunity because like just the interviews alone gives us such a great space to actually interact and talk to these GMs and these obscure instructors that we would never have access to and be able to hear them and hear their story and actually say their piece, let alone the networking of what the group does. Because the group's ability to like interface with each other with what 14,000 people is incredible. So
yeah. I mean, it happens to all of us. I mean,
yeah,
for the past year myself, like I took a 3 month break just 'cause,
yeah,
well, we talked about this in the past. I was relocating and all this
yeah.
stuff was happening. Um, yeah, and just like on a creative sense, the discipline to constantly put out quality content is just it wears on you mentally, like emotionally,
Hmm.
physically. Um, Especially like editors, if you look at cinema to edit a 120-minute movie, it's gonna put a wear and tear on your body.
Yeah.
Uh, Sitting all day. I mean, shoot, I was seeing a chiropractor, at one point. So, it's long hours because everyone can set up a camera and record themselves, but can they edit it in a way for it to be a story as opposed to
Hmm.
quick 60-second flash of, oh, look at me, like, and then that's it. But that's kind of where the generation's going now, 60-second video content.
Yeah, Flash with no real like substantiation, or yeah, was it Flash with no content or Flash with that? I don't know. It's late in the day, but still, it's that whole like, yeah, it looks cool, but what did we just see? What's the point of it? So
Yeah, and
yeah, well,
it's challenging too, like social media. Like we never expected things to we've seen people's attention spans get lower and lower and lower and lower with social media to the point where it's like if it's longer than 60 seconds, it's not they'll tune out to go on to a next video,
Yeah.
which is sad because if you're going to read a book, are you just going to read the the first chapter and last chapter without knowing what's going on in the middle? Uh, it's
Yeah.
it's difficult too because it's like people want to be entertained quickly, as opposed to just letting everything soak in from beginning, middle, and end. Because, for example, I have friends that work in the video game industry, and
Hmm.
one of their coworkers, she told me like she can't watch an entire movie, a 2 hour movie, or even a 90-minute movie in its entirety because she loses focus. It's like she's always so used to YouTube content and TikTok that she can't really sit down and just watch a movie in its entirety, which is like
That's
what?
unfortunate. That's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, and I think with martial arts in general, people want that quick microwave instant gratification without
Yeah.
working. Um, and then once things go down and they get their butts whipped, I'm like, I'm sorry, like,
What'd
get
you expect?
yeah, like you didn't spar or you didn't really practice it in a way where it's like, okay, how can this actually work in a fight? You're just learning like an art form, like you're learning dance.
Yeah.
It's tough too because you have a lot of people that, especially with an FMA, can only learn it through seminars or online. But then,
Hmm.
how do you train with someone who's actually skillful enough to get that resistance training?
Yeah.
Uh, but everything now is like, especially in America, everything has to be revolving around safety. Um,
Yeah.
and when they see weapons, they get freaked out. But it's just it's a tough thing with what we do. It's how do you maintain quality? You go over do you do quality over quantity or quantity over quality? So
Yeah. And that goes again, even back to the whole thing. Do I have brick and mortar or do I go travel? Because brick and mortar, yeah, that's a long patient game. I mean, traveling is a long patient game as well, but it is also I can go hit a ton of different seminars within a month every weekend from driving. But unless I'm training in between, I mean, then what good is it doing? I'm just acquiring stuff and interactions, but if I'm not actually putting the work on the mat, it doesn't do anything. Now, the other caveat to that, with the brick and mortar standpoint, if I have a brick and mortar and I still don't do anything, it's still in the same situation. So,
yeah,
or I have the brick and mortar and I don't go and seek other training and have that accountability, I'm still stagnant and not growing. So, trying to find that balance is really key. And this is where like this idea about leveling up your students to surpass you, there's a bit of ego for people who are of the unenlightened, saying that I should always be better than my students because I'm the instructor, and that whole ego mantra. But fact is, we want our students to be better than us because that means that they actually are learning and progressing and achieving, and they actually might figure out some stuff that we were physically or just intellectually incapable of. And that's how the system progresses versus just being stagnant and obscure. So with our students becoming a beginner and then a training partner and then somebody who can actually carry the flag further, I mean, that's how it should be anyways, because there is a deficiency of like physical age and capability, because there's a certain point where, yeah, I have all the experience, but I also have all the injuries and I also have all the age, and my 20 to 30 some year old student who is just now coming up to that point, who physically is capable, may not have all the experience, but has the intellect, capability, and physical prowess to actually pull stuff off. So,
yeah. I mean, yeah. I mean, it's tough because even though like in our hearts and in our minds we're still in our 20s and we can still go, our bodies are like,
yeah,
like you got to stretch.
sitting on,
You got to stretch first.
oh man, yeah, sitting on a plane for longer than an hour. Yeah, they got to do some work. Oh man,
But yeah, I mean, it's going to be interesting how things go moving forward, because from the 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s to now, the
Hmm.
media, we absorb the energy. I mean, the information is just is like it's gradual now. It's like people can absorb things faster.
Yeah.
Uh, Whereas like in the 80s, you would have to pay hundreds or even thousands of dollars for those VHS tapes to learn
Mm.
something. You have to have a friend to train with,
Yep.
uh, or even go to a seminar to learn from that instructor. But I don't know, like in terms of what's quality and what's good. There's so many videos out there now. It's just like, who do you know
Right.
who to trust, because everything is so saturated. And then from my perspective within FMA, like everything starts to look the same after a while.
Yeah, it does. It really does. And we all end up arguing over spelling. But back to the whole thing about having a friend and a videotape. I mean, that alone, just having a friend who's willing to sit there and fight and figure it out with you, and having that training partner, that alone is can be better than just showing up to the dojo twice a week and just drilling basics and not actually doing anything, or just showing up to a seminar once a month and just still not doing anything. And you actually have somebody who's trying to actively figure this stuff out with you, and you can bounce ideas off of each other and go through the physical patterns and go through that whole process of discovery. That itself can actually be the creation of a whole nother art. But it's also, I mean, it's a collaborative experience for the both of you, and you both are actually learning together and discovering together, and also like holding each other accountable. So,
Yeah,
and that part's actually kind of fun.
yeah, because like even with like let's take Balintawak for example. When I look at GM Bobby, and then I met his friends in the Philippines with GM Nick, GM Danny
Hmm.
Cat. It's all Balintawak, but you could see the size difference between GM Bobby and his friends.
Yep.
Uh, their movements are different. It's like, yeah, the angles in which they're feeding and the patterns are the same, but the energies are
Yep.
different.
Yep.
It's like boxing. You have your orthodox fighting stance, your Philly shell, you got your southpaw position, your peekaboo fighting stance. But it's still boxing.
Hmm.
So
Yeah, and like back to the Balintawak one, because I'm doing Balintawak remote, I'm having to teach my guy Cooper Balintawak while I'm still trying to figure out Balintawak, and that right there is a very interesting learning process. Plus, with the videography of like trying to go over the video, sending video, doing the critiques, and figuring it out together. I mean, that's a whole different learning process, which is fun. I don't know if I would want to replace it with actually sitting there in a class, do drill to a point, because it gives us the freedom to explore. But even though it comes at the behest of like quality control, because there's a lot of stuff that we just don't get because we don't have somebody to mentor us and say, hey, fix it immediately. This is the reasons why. So it's
yeah,
a weird little dichotomy that we run into. Fortunately, I mean, I do have a lot of really good help that is immediately available to ask questions.
yeah. Unless you're some prodigy where you're self-taught, um,
Hmm.
and you figure you just learn everything through visualization and training in your backyard with a friend as opposed to having a mentor. But that's a
Yeah.
rare.
Yeah. Because I mean, all the stuff in Balintawak, I can do all the movements. The movements are all there because I'm a human and we have human movement. Putting the pattern together and associating the words, particular to the pattern, that's the trick. That's the curriculum. That's the hard part is figure out the names, figure out the grouping system, and put the stuff together in sequence. Because everything it's nothing's been invented per se. It's just the pattern is what's specific there.
Yeah,
Because I mean, our frame can only move so many different ways.
exactly. And the thing is, it's like I could see the commonalities between systems,
Yep.
but what makes Balintawak like Balintawak and Serrata has its own visual
Flavor.
flair, so
Yeah.
you know what style it is
Yep.
eventually. But going outside of their patterns and their training, general FMA is like it all pretty much looks the same, even though
Yeah.
different. I mean,
But the pop, and snap that's Balintawak, especially GM Bobby's, yeah, that's got a flavor to it.
yeah. And it's when you look at other FMA systems, it seems like everyone does a Sinawali.
Hmm.
And then they do some type of sombrata drill, or sometimes they don't even call it a sombrata drill, they'll call it something else.
Yeah.
The terminology changes, but the drill is the same.
Yeah.
One thing I've noticed as well, and like I might call from how I learned the sombrata drill, like we called it a 3-1-2 back in Chicago, but they might call it something else in another system, but
Yeah.
still the same pattern. So,
Yeah. Oh yeah, it's like learning Sabayan because I mean Sabayan and Sombrata. I mean they're similar as to like it's a collaborative feed drill, but I mean yeah, it's a different energy, different pattern obviously. But the fact is, it's still a collaborative partner drill. And once you figure out the pattern sequence, all the movements there. It's just attaching the movement to understanding like the process. That's the hard part. But yeah, back with Balintawak though, like the thing that Belton's been like really hammering into me is making sure that I have that flavor, that snappy flavor,
yeah.
and that look to it. Because I mean that is the stylistic look that is going to walk, and it's one of the things I really enjoy about it because it's so dynamic.
Yep. And yeah, I mean, especially with GM Bobby's, presentation of Balintawak,
Hmm.
it's really clean,
Hmm.
and it's also the way that he's able to formulate it for you to learn it,
Yeah,
um, as opposed to the traditional way where it would have to be one on one
yeah.
for you to understand it.
Yeah. Actually, it was really cool when I was down for West Coast, and we're bird trailing here. But when I was down for West Coast in August, he did something new apparently, where he had like all of his level sevens present something for like 5-10 minutes, and they're building off of each other. But it was really cool to see like with the wide variety of different shapes, different sizes, different athleticism, and just different understandings of stuff, but everybody was still very snappy Balintawak within that rubric, and they could take the puzzle pieces or the Lego pieces and like mix match and make it their own, but still fit within the scope of Balintawak that everybody understood it, and that's incredible. So
Oh
and
yeah,
it's just yeah.
I call it like reverse JKD because you start
Hmm.
with block base and then you explore after level 6. Like what are
Yeah.
the like I like how GM Bobby says like he wants you to explore the holes in Balintawak and what can you do
Yeah.
to fill in those holes.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, my process to level 6 and level 7 is going to be it's an interesting one in some remote, but I mean it is the thing that I'm focusing on these days. So
I mean, it's a good art
yeah,
for me. Like what drew me into well specifically GM Bobby's version of Balintawak is that it focuses only on the single stick, and me coming from an
hmm,
education on the systematic way of teaching it to others for them to understand it,
yeah,
um,
yeah,
as opposed to the flavor of the day, the old school way that I learned it. It's like sink or swim system. Like you just do what I do. So
yeah, yeah. Yeah, and like the fact is, you can go to any Balintawak group that's underneath GM Bobby's banner, and you have at least a basis of understanding of curriculum, expectations, and you can plug and play wherever you need to go because it's not subjective as to like, well, this is what we think it is. It's like, no, this is what it is because everybody knows the standard, and that is incredible for having a system to be that way. Because the thing that we find with a lot of other FMA systems out there is that like the different camps have a different approach and flavor to it, even though it's underneath one particular banner. It's still this issue of like, is it really this thing, or are we just saying because we're associated to the banner? Because the curriculum may not be as standardized.
yeah, yeah, it's. I mean, I heard this. There was this. It was the same problem with modern Arnis, like
Hmm.
with press us and people trying to, or at least instructors trying for testing purposes.
Hmm.
Because when I interviewed Bruce Chu, Chris Chu's dad, and it was just
Yeah,
you trained whatever. I'm like, all right, we want to learn locks or and then learning these specific drills and certain techniques. But what you learn today, cause technique number one might be different next week, and the
yeah, yeah. Not having a standardized curriculum is a problem for maintaining the longevity of an art, and also, I mean, the accountability of the art of the instructor. It's one thing to have like going through phases as an instructor, like figuring out new truths and new ways to do stuff and like adjusting the curriculum. That's perfectly fine. It's just when you don't write it down, I still like here's version one, here's version two, and having that progression, it's left up to this question after that master leaves us, and all the subordinates just kind of are like fighting for the position of who's going to be at lead and who has all the truth, who has all the knowledge, who has the correct curriculum.
Yeah. And it's hard because, especially where a lot of so I'm not saying all, but there are those groups that say we can do anything, everything.
Yeah. No.
That double stick, yeah. Espada y daga, yeah. We could do long pole too. Also, we could do Seabot. We could do dagger. We could do sword, long sword, short swords.
Yeah. FMA is everything. It's like, is it really? I mean, you're not everything, but FMA can be everything. But you, the individual, that may not be the case. So, yeah.
It's like a PhD. What's your isolated study
Right.
of like the whole picture? Like, you're looking at a painting and you're looking at one tree. You're basically that one tree in a bigger picture. So
Yeah. Yeah. Like for my case, my primary focus is single knife, single stick. That's my bread and butter. That's what I know, or at least what I think I know. Everything else, like double stick, I like double stick, but I don't have a lot of depth in it per se. I don't know the full modern arnis like Bandia Banda drills for it. Um, Doggy Espada, I mean, I like it as an idea, but I end up playing more of it like I do with Rapier and Parry Dagger than I do with Filipino approach to it because that's what I do. So, and Seabot for me, yeah, I treat it more like a Chinese long pole, like a spear, than I know with a Seabot. So I don't know. It's that's just me, but because I have so much other stuff that influences me outside of the scope of FMA, and that's what I'm constantly asking: is it FMA? Now, as I said yesterday, is that for me when I throw it out there, is it FMA? Majority of the time, it's not. It's just stuff that I do, flavored by whatever I've done in the past. But the question also asks though, for people out there, what I'm doing is it FMA, and it's kind of particular to their lens. Because is it because I'm Filipino doing martial arts, or is it because Filipino martial arts states constantly that we can do everything? Which I mean, we can, but can we really?
Yeah, I mean, remember when I interviewed GM Carlito Bonjak,
yeah,
way back when he was doing a seminar.
Yeah.
He said he's like the true essence of FMA is we study and learn other systems so we could learn how to destroy it later. That's what he said.
That's fair. That's fair. I like I like that. Okay.
So I was like, oh, okay, yeah, because even with Filipino boxing, they had to they saw boxing and the thought process is how do we counter this or how do we get around it?
Yep.
How the enemy fights, how do we get around it? And I think most cultures are adaptable if they're not caught up in the fantasy, of what they have of saying that they're the best.
Yeah.
The Philippines have always been an open mind in terms of it's like, how can we use this against them, or how could we figure out a way to get around it?
Right. Well, with a nation that has such the history of being constantly invaded, occupied, let alone raiding its neighbors, I mean, we have a pretty good history as a overall modern nation state in our heritage. Since October is Filipino American Heritage Month or History Month, I forget. But yeah, we have a lot of history in understanding how to use this stuff. So it is fair to say that the Filipino martial arts or the fighting methodologies of the nation of the Philippines has been pretty tested over the years based upon like the amount of times we've been invaded, amount of times we go invade each other. And there's a constant process of learning stuff and figuring out what works.
Well, yeah, because I mean, fighting. When you say fighting, it's universal.
Yeah.
Uh, and Tini Makachor said this is like, is there a Viking martial art? Like, no, they just know how to fight. uh,
Ulima, maybe Viking wrestling, or is it German wrestling? I forget, but yeah.
but yeah, if you look at other island nations that share the similar history of the Philippines, in which they were constantly being invaded or conquered,
Hmm.
you had to find ways to, attack someone who was not only more technologically advanced than they are, but
Hmm.
tactically advanced. So of course it had to be more guerrilla warfare tactics.
Yeah.
And also, if you look at Sicily,
Hmm.
where the birthplace of mafia, they're
Yep.
not going to kill you. Like I'm challenge you to a knife fight. Like, no, like I'm gonna poison you when you sleep, or when you're eating dinner, I'm gonna shank you while you're eating.
Yep.
And that's not really a martial art. I mean, that's assassination.
Yep.
And the thing is, it's like you don't tell your enemies of how you're gonna take them out, especially if you're a small nation, and your enemy has all these weapons and the forces that are stronger than you. You have to find out more creative ways of how do you fight.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so either you're gonna have to poison them, do a drive-by,
Ambush. Yeah.
yeah, and that using your resources against the enemy. And I think that's in essence what FMA is like. Compare that to the same thing with Ireland
Yeah.
with them fighting against the British. So it the art form. That's the thing. It's like, what is the art form and how does it relate to
Yeah.
the nation?
Yeah. And it is thoroughly possible to do all three. You can have the art, you can have the history, or better yet, you can have the art and history, you can have the combat, modern combat stuff, and you can also have the historical combat stuff attached to, or I should say sport combat, because there's really three elements of martial arts that we commonly see. We see historical, artistic expression. We see current combatives used for military usage, and then we see the combat sport. And it's thoroughly possible to have all three and enjoy all three. It's just the caveat that we run into is from the instructor and the practitioner to have the intellectual honesty and have that real conversation with themselves, saying that those are whatever they're doing is one of the or the other, and not saying that one is the other, because often enough we run into like the cultural art did work at one point but isn't going to work necessarily all the time. And the idea of battle tested, like, well, battle tested, yeah, a couple hundred years ago, sure, but we have to have that understanding of knowing what we're looking at and actually have that honesty with ourselves and saying, yeah, that's art, and I can love it for that being art, but I'm not going to use that per se in a modern conflict. Or that's sport, and that's great for what that does for attribute development, but sport has rules and it's still not combat, but we
Yeah,
can still like it all. So
yeah. And that's the thing. Like Shakespeare, like
yep.
no one speaks that type of English anymore. But it's still to be enjoyed as theater and a play of
Yep.
how English then to now. No one acts or speaks that way anymore. But in the context of what it is an art form of eloquent way of speaking English.
Yeah. 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 So
But
we're
yeah,
not
since we're a globalized society now, it's just like we're all taking from each other.
yeah.
The only thing that's not really implemented when they're teaching something is the tradition and cultures behind it. Like,
Yeah.
what is American fighting style?
That's a good question. That is a good question. I mean, to avoid like the whole homogenous approach to all martial arts and just calling just generalized combatives or combat sport. I mean, this is where the attention and the importance of saying, here's the cultural roots as to where this came from, and here's the reasons why they do this for this way. And this is actually the genius thing that the Japanese martial arts, specifically like karate do, anything with the do attached to it, is they're teaching you the way of karate, thereby teaching the way of what it is to be Japanese and adherence to the Japanese culture.
Yep.
For FMA, there's such an identity crisis, for one, as to what it is it to be a Filipino, two, what's Filipino martial arts, and three, what's the important part? Are we actually teaching a fighting methodology, or are we teaching a culture? And more importantly, what part of the culture and which subset, which island? It's so muddled and complicated because one, there isn't a general consensus as to what is FMA or what is a Filipino, because that's going to be a tricky one trying to answer.
Yeah, I mean, it's in terms of FMA, it's also, you know, survival. How can you
Yeah.
find survive without giving up on life? You know,
Yeah.
and Filipinos are really crafty with what they have.
Hmm.
I saw a documentary on YouTube where this guy worked in a shed out in the middle of the province, and he could copy any type of gun, but the
Yeah.
quality of metal is not there. So
Yeah.
it's only to be used like a couple of times before the metal cracks. So he'll make it and he'll sell it to whatever, you know, drug dealer or person in the city. He gets
Yeah.
his. It's basically a throwaway gun.
Yeah. The high point is basically what it is.
Yeah.
So
So and you know, Filipinos are really resourceful with what they have, even though it's
yeah.
not. Um, because when we interviewed Mang Romy, it was
Hmm.
and he was saying like he put it in a context where it was like Philippines is a poor country. It's
Yeah.
not like the West, like Europe or America, where they can make trainer blades. If they're gonna forge a blade, it's gonna be a real blade because they're not gonna play around and just like, oh, let's make a trainer blade. Like, no, this is gonna be a real blade. So
Yeah.
if they're gonna put the effort into using their own resources, it has to have a function.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And this is and for like the Western thought, looking at Southeast Asian martial arts or even classical Asian martial arts, when comparatively to the Philippines compared to the rest of Asia, is I mean, there's such a significant difference in just like the way that Westerners digest our media, our approach, and our cultural significance, because you can clearly see that's Japanese, that's karate, that's you can definitely see a samurai. With Korean, you can definitely tell it's taekwondo or anything specific to it with K-pop. But and with China, you can definitely yeah. Um, China, you can clearly see the wide varieties of different Chinese martial arts, but there's still a specific flavor as to the cultural garb, the method of movement, the philosophy. So, I mean, with the Philippines, that's still something really difficult, and this is where like I see a lot of people with the decolonization mentality is go back to the indigenous traditional approach to stuff with the clothing, the garb, the language, and all that. But if we want to go with decolonize our mind, like how far back do we want to go? Because do we want to go prior to American involvement, prior to Spanish involvement? Because even before then, we weren't a unified nation. So how do we unify a overall look without actually like splitting up entirely? And this is like one of those big questions when talking about is it FMA, is it Filipino? It's like, well, let's define what Filipino is.
Yeah.
So
I mean, because like the ancient name of what the Philippines was before it became the Philippines, which is King Philip the Second's name. I
mhm.
heard the name of the archipelago, which is now the Philippines, is called Maharlika.
Yeah, yep.
If, I don't know if that's in the playbook or that's something that, you know, to decolonize that whole Philippines Western mentality, to give it its own identity, to go back to that name, which sounds cool, by the way.
Yeah,
Are you like, what are you, like a Maharlikan? Like, oh, that sounds exotic. All that stuff. Yeah, I mean, it's to go before Spanish colonization. Because we talked about this before when we last
yeah,
spoke. Month,
yeah,
especially Phil Ams want something that's not really Western influence, either
Yeah.
Spanish or American. So they'll look at traditional weapon, the martial arts. They'll look into dances, even some of the spiritual practices too. Like, like most Filipinos are Catholic, and
Yeah.
the old school Filipinos consider tattoos a taboo, but back then it was more accepted. So now it's like they want to go and check out the tattoo culture,
Yep.
and it's constantly researching and trying to find what what were the traditions and customs before Spain and America.
Yeah, I mean, like, and we've talked about this before. Um, like trying to figure out, I'm making sure I have the correct tattoos. There was a big reason why I don't have Filipino tattoos because I wanted to make sure I had the tribe correct or the regional area correct. Because with my adoption, by the way, for everybody who's out there, I'm an adopted Filipino. This is why my last name's German, and I have this accent versus my other accent. So, but point being is it. I did 23andMe a few years ago, and I figured out, like, hey, my biological mother was from Olongapo. My biological father was from Iloilo. I only learned that like 2 years ago. So making sure that I have the correct tattoos for those regions is important because I don't want to be stuck with like the random symbol for soup or like the miss cultural appropriation because that lends to the other question is can you culturally appropriate your own culture? Because I mean, there's certain tattoos that people have to earn, and there's certain tattoos just don't work. Because if you're a man with a fertility tattoo, that's a little odd.
Yeah, I've heard
So
the wrong symbols being put on people,
yeah,
and it's weird too because I have a few friends in Chicago that were into the spiritual, like ancient. They're trying to bring back the old spiritual practices as well.
hmm
Um, but with me, like I don't know if you're spiritual or religious at all, but I'm like, if you don't know what you're doing with that, I don't think you should be, doing incantations. Do something that you read in a book. Um, if someone didn't teach you this, I mean, I don't trust
yeah.
doing that stuff if you don't know what the hell you're doing. It's like people's like, oh yeah, I'm a self-taught witch. I'm like, oh yeah, no, I'm not gonna do that.
Okay. Yeah, that's tricky. It really is. Now I appreciate like the exuberance because I fall in that category of trying to like reattach myself to my culture that I was never taught because I was raised here in the States by white people, just straight and grew up around lots of white people. So I just don't know much about my own culture. Through FMA, I've learned a lot, and through my own self study, I've learned a lot. But still, I can appreciate the Filipino American story of trying to that yearn for what was not presented to them, denied to them in some cases, and just like yearn for what they were before. And I can also understand some like the generational trauma and and there was some generational hate and misgivings about being colonized. That's truly a thing. So I can appreciate all that. But again, with the scope of FMA and Filipinos, is like how far back do we want to go? Because at some point we have to remove certain sectors of that overall cultural modern culture to get back to where we were. Like FMA, for example, some of our blade work that's highly influenced by Spanish blade work. I mean, if we want to be truly traditional, you have to remove some of that.
Yeah, I mean even the word espada y daga is Spanish,
Yeah.
and I think this caused a lot of confusion within the Philippines. That you kept a lot of the Spanish words, uh,
hmm
and even some of the towns and cities are in Spanish.
hmm
Part of the Spanish language has been implemented into the Philippines.
hmm
But if you look at Latin America and the Caribbean, they assimilated totally to the Spanish language, but yet still have their own cultures intact.
Yep. Yep.
With the Philippines, you have English and Spanish, but it's not fully like you're not fully entrenched into that language like
Yeah.
America. So it's like at one point, the Philippines did have Spanish as a second language to learn,
Yep.
but more influence from America came that kind of got phased out, and English replaced it.
Yep.
And at that point, if someone told me that back then, like if you knew Spanish in the Philippines, they considered you upper class.
Yeah, the Mestezio thing. Yeah. Yeah.
And, like if you were gonna, with the national movement, if they went the way of what the rest of Latin America did, then everyone would still be speaking Spanish in the Philippines, and at least they can connect back to Latin America,
Yeah.
uh, and even with Spain to a point. But if there was a national movement to reclaim, we are the Philippines, and then establish, a national language,
Hmm.
they on what Japan did and cut off any Western influence to
Yep.
their. That's why Japan still maintains their indigenous names and their cultures.
Oh
Uh,
yeah.
so it's like, all right, we got to get rid of these Spanish names. We got to get rid of these Spanish towns. We got to get rid of the Spanish forts or anything that was Western influence in the Philippines,
Hmm.
and bring back the old traditional cultural values. But no, they didn't do that, and so now it's like it becomes a cultural identity because you're an Asian complexion with a Spanish last name, but you don't speak Spanish. And how do you
Yeah.
someone?
Yeah. And interesting enough, the majority of your clothing looks Spanish to a point. So yeah, and you're also Catholic. So yeah, that it is. It's confusing, and I mean it's totally possible because India has been doing it systematically for what better half of 20, almost 30 years now, by going back to the cultural names prior to British colonization and pushing for that movement of more of the indigenous cultural belief systems and practices. So it's definitely possible. It's just, like you said, trying to get a general consensus of a nation to agree upon it. That's going to be tricky because we do also run the risk of like splitting the nation because our brethren down in the south don't necessarily want to be part of the overall Philippines. That's why there's been such a long-standing insurgency for however long it's been going. So that's something also to consider as to if we were to go back to who we were before, who we were before was pretty disconnected and disorganized. So, and it comes in a loss potentiality of a big chunk of our population. So,
Yeah, and especially if before Spain came, Philippines was pretty much a huge trading port, so
yep,
people were coming in and out, even pirates. So
yep,
you don't know what traces came from other nations back then.
yep.
Because even the Chinese were in the Philippines before the Spanish. So like how much China influenced the Philippines culture. So
Or India, for example.
too.
India through the Java trade and the Indo-Malaysian archipelago. I mean, there we are.
Yep.
Not to mention like the indigenous Aborigines coming from Madagascar, going all the way up through the Philippines and then down to Australia and Papua New Guinea and New Zealand. So I mean, there's again going back. How far back do we want to go? And until we as a people really come together and figure that out, we're going to have an identity crisis, and it's interesting, but it can also be unfortunate. I'm of the opinion that it's going to be interesting because it gives us the opportunity to really choose the destiny of who we are, and by extension with FMA, we can really choose what FMA is going to be. So,
Yeah.
or what it can be.
Yeah. And that's the thing. The Philippines lives in its bubble. So
Yep.
questions talking or all these topics that we're talking about may not come up in their minds, like about identity issues.
Yep.
Only comes up when they go to another country and they start
Hmm.
asking questions, and then you're not really prepared to handle it.
Yeah. Oh yeah, like the consistent one I'm running into again, like my German, my name is very German and Irish because my adoptive family is very German and Irish. My accent's very neutral when I'm using this accent, but whenever my accent pops in, it's the very Southern California island accent, particular to being more pigeon-like than anything else. So it's not even like a Filipino accent for that matter. So when I'm around other people and they hear me speak, especially when my accent slips in, they're like, what are you? It's like, well, I'm whatever I want to be. So,
Yeah. And the thing about Filipinos is their ability to learn and adapt quick.
yeah.
That's one thing that I've learned about Filipinos that they can go to any country and pick up their language like this. Like even though they're not using the right grammar, they can really quickly.
Yep.
And it's good and bad because they could learn and they can survive. They can go to any environment and survive.
Mm-hmm.
In order for them to survive, they may have to lose part of their identity to survive.
Right.
And I noticed this too with it's weird because when I went to Brazil and like when I went to Puerto Rico and other parts of Latin America, within like 2 or 3 weeks of staying there, I'm like starting to pick things up a little bit, little by little, and then I start speaking it more. Like if I would have been there for like 3 or 4 months, I would have been like speaking pure Portuguese or Spanish. But
yeah,
with the Latino friends I do have in Chicago, I was like, learning Spanish here and there, but not formally. So, I do pick things up. It's too bad I'm not fully entrenched in any culture to get a full scope of it. It's like my Tagalog is really terrible. It's like Taglish. So
mine is it's awful. I mean, well, growing up in Southern California, I grew up speaking Spanish. I mean, I spoke Spanish fluently. It's just being away from Southern Cal for so long, I'm out of practice. But with like Tagalog, it's very much I don't hear things in Tagalog because it's never been taught to me. So there's certain sounds I just can't replicate, or when I attempt to, it's still very off. So it ends up sounding more Spanish than what it's supposed to be. So it's a really interesting situation because for anybody learning new language over on top of like their current language, especially if it's so different, that's also a tricky one because it's more than just like the syntax. It's more than just like the phonology. It's the accenting and understanding those features is what really makes the language. Because you can read out of a dictionary and try to muddle through it, but if you don't know how to make the accent work, you clearly will not be able to speak it properly, and people will definitely tell that you're not a native speaker.
Yeah, and people don't know. Well, let's take Spanish, for example, that there's very distinct accents within each Latin country.
Mm-hmm.
There's like because Mexican Spanish is different from Puerto Rican Spanish, different from Colombian Spanish, and because there's a lot of different lingos and enunciations that differ in each Spanish language. When I was in Brazil, the northern Portuguese accent is different from the southern accent. So that threw me off when I was speaking, trying to speak, because like I would mix Spanish with Portuguese, but they still understood what I was saying.
Yeah.
But it's still either Spanish or Portuguese. It just, Puerto Rican Spanish is really fast, and it seems like they don't have a tongue. Like there's a lot of slang in certain parts of Mexican Spanish because I had a friend in college who was from Spain, and he's like, man, Mexican Spanish sounds like they're drunk all the time.
Yeah. And then you got like Castilian Spanish. So yeah, it's a fascinating part because, like, again, going back to like what is FMA, like the consistent thing that we see all the time is the argument over spelling, and like this word didn't exist back in the Philippines, and this is now a modern amalgamation by Philam and Americans and this, that, and the other. Like that alone is like a never-ending battle of, is it Panan or Panun? Is it Sun or Sundukan? Is it Kali or is it Eskrima? And it's like it's never ending. And until we can like agree, like here is the modern lexicon of this is Filipino martial arts. Therefore, we say if it's Filipino martial arts, it is a modern term, probably Philam FMA. So was developed here in the West. So there's already a language structure particular to that. So until like we can come to like consensus across the board, there's still gonna be like all these little squabbles and arguments. And on top of all that, for like a very basic practitioner to understand the differences in language structure, or even the understanding that there is differences in language structure and accepting that fact and quit getting like arguing over the semantics of things, it's still gonna be a tricky situation. It's totally possible, but still a tricky situation.
Yeah. And that's something that these are like deep questions to be resolved, because it's really important, because a lot
Hmm.
of to Spanish, even the word Eskrima, you have Eskrima with a K, Eskrima with a C, and then
And with a G, and
with
there's
an
one with a G.
so it's they maybe they had to use the term because there was no equivalent in terms of the traditional language. There was no word to explain what it was doing.
Yeah.
That's why maybe the old school guys didn't have names for techniques. They just said, do this, do that. If he does this, you do this, and you do that.
Yeah.
It's like, so in terms of reactionary, reacting to what's given to you within a fight context is like, you have, it's like organized. You have some type of game plan, but everything else is just reactionary.
Yeah.
Especially, most fights break out when people are drunk anyway, and like you're not really thinking straight. So
Yeah, it's true. It's very true. Yeah, I think because like I'm gonna shout out to Sachi Viril from the Lightning Eskrima group, I believe. He's friends with more of the point. He put out this really long, good list and breakdown of terminology in FMA discussion, and it was a really interesting read. And you can see very specifically where people like this is a particular language structure that this glossary pertains to, and then you see some other lists that are out there, and you can definitely tell it's not Tagalog or it's not Cebuano or it's not Ilocano or it's Hilingayan. It's like there's different. You can definitely tell there's different languages being utilized there. But for the average purveyor of FMA coming into FMA, especially being very basic or new to it, they may not understand the differences between the different language structures, and that is also important because with again going back to like some of the other classical Asian martial arts like kung fu, like the Japanese martial arts or the Korean martial arts, there's a very set structure. Like this is Korean, this is Japanese. You're learning because it's a singular language. You're
yeah,
not dealing with the wide variety of different languages in the Philippines. I mean, like just your three major ones. So,
yeah. I mean, it's like in the U.S., it's all English, but you got
mhm.
your New York accent, you got your West Coast accent, you got your New Jersey accent, you got your Boston accent,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
you got your Southern accent. So um, it's but it's still English.
yeah,
But it's yeah, the Philippines, like, yeah, everyone has their own language,
yeah,
but yeah, that'll unify them is English.
yeah.
And I've heard stories of certain Filipinos learning all the other languages quite easily, and so they could speak all the other languages in the Philippines.
Yeah.
So when I was in Cebu, they said they could pick up Tagalog faster than Tagalog speakers can pick up Cebuano. So I found
Yeah,
that.
yeah, I've heard that too.
Uh, but yeah, I mean, at this point, it's going to take a lot of teamwork, I guess, and for everyone to get on the same page. Um, it's it's a long task to see if that can happen. Especially you got half of a nation that's Muslim, and the other
Hmm.
Catholic, and then the other part that's somewhere in the middle. Uh,
Yeah. Then you got all the indigenous tribes that are still like, we weren't conquered. Leave us the hell alone.
yeah.
So,
So it's an interesting dynamic of
yeah.
what things are going to come. Um, but it's going to be weird now since the United States military is making their way back to the Philippines. They're going
Yep.
to influence things again.
That's gonna be interesting. I mean, there's some great opportunity there for, um, I guess, some exchange of information, commerce, and overall safety and security in the region. Um, so there's that, but there's also like more of the identity crisis that's coming about. My son's getting ready for bed, and I don't have a studio. So thank you everybody for enjoying my son making a cameo appearance. So yeah. So I mean, having more of the influence by the West is going to be it's going to be interesting, especially with the again the America. being in the Philippines is going to consistently be an issue with identity for the Filipinos. It's an inherent issue, and good or otherwise, it's just going to be a thing. And what I find back with FMA, FMA as its current composition is clearly Americanized. And I mean, just even like, again, the argument I've heard consistently is like the general term for FMA is an Americanized term. So moving forward in the next 20, 30 years, FMA is going to be very much like Phil-Am Western. And there's going to be a significant like shift, change, I perceive, between that and the indigenous. Because again, we're separated by an ocean for one. So, and there's not like the collective like influence per se back in the homeland and versus here in the West. As much as there's more influence here in the West than it is back in the homeland, because Filipino ambassadors, online ambassadors back in the Philippines, are far fewer in between than they are comparatively to here in the West.
Oh yeah, and it's interesting when Sonny Season was talking about the anthropologist Gicano.
Mhm.
I would like to pick his brain, you know, over a beer or a cup of coffee, because the stuff that was propagated when I was learning it, you know, the Filipino martial arts in the States.
Mhm.
Now I'm starting to think like, okay, that's Phil Am stories and histories and folklore,
Yep.
but does
Yep.
it back home with what's being propagated here in the States? So now I'm starting to think, I'm like, okay, the traditions and cultures of the context of the art is not really aligning with the history with the Philippines.
Yep.
So, ooh, this is going to be a touchy subject, because people believe these folklore stories like it's Jesus. So,
Yep. Yep. I mean, but the fact is, other martial arts went through it as well. Because like even the stories and the mythology surrounded some behind Shaolin Kung Fu. I mean, there's some very interesting stories and mythology there that generally people accept because it's part of the cultural like makeup and legacy is folklore, but there isn't any real documented proof per se of somebody in a cave meditating for however long. Because like the fact is there just isn't. We have to accept that fact, but we appreciate it as a folklore tale. Some of us do, but yeah, I think that relies on like the individual practitioner to like have that critical thinking and capability to say, yeah, that's folklore. We tell these stories because it's part of the journey, it's part of the process, but it's still folklore. But here is the history of actually what's written and what's actually proven and documented. But the folklore is still important as well.
yeah. So I mean, all in all, it's just there has to be a clarification
Yeah.
going forward. Because the whole thing with, you know, if they're still propagating misinformation, it's getting worse and worse, and it's going to cause more of a division.
Yeah.
But you know, the thing about, I think I mentioned this in the past, that Filipinos put passion before logic sometimes, and so
Yeah.
I'd be like, ah, you're wrong, you're, you know, Phil Ams, and then Filipinos and be like, no, that's not the real history. And then you have, you know, non-Filipinos that are like pro Phil Am history, and they're like, no, you don't know your history, Filipino. So you're gonna tell the people in the Philippines you don't know what they're talking about.
Yeah.
So,
Oh, don't
you know,
tell me about my culture, sir. Yeah. Oh man. Oh, that's funny. Oh, to be fair, I've met some very non-Filipino FMA people who know way more about my culture than I do. They've been back to the Philippines more than I have. So I mean, there's that aspect too. So
yeah, it's yeah, I mean, yeah, it's, but it's kind of weird when a non-Filipino tells you about your own culture.
it
Uh,
is a little weird. It is a little awkward. Oh well, but it's up to the individual to say like, okay, to make this less awkward, I need to go like educate myself about my own people, my history, my language. So to make it less awkward. That's accountability. And there's a lot of people who don't want to take the accountability if they'll be offended because it's perceived as racism. But but how can you be offended when you don't? It's more like the offense of like I really don't know what I'm talking about because I don't know my own people, my own history, and I got called out for it. I can see that part being like an ego issue. But the fact is, for the accountability of that would-be person to be offended by somebody else telling them about their culture when they don't know about their own culture, it's like, well, go educate yourself. Go learn about your people. Go learn about your culture. Go learn about your language and your martial art, if it has one, and just like figure out that identity piece by going and seeking out the knowledge. And it's because you're allowed to. You should. Because I mean, nobody's telling you can't.
Yeah, and I mean,
So,
if you put into context, you know, outside of California and Hawaii, which is pretty much Filipino central,
yep, yep,
they're more inclined to learn more about the Filipino culture than Filipinos that live in the Midwest or East Coast. So, like for example, when I was in Chicago, it's really a diverse city like New York, but
hmm
it's each area has its own pocket of
hmm
nationalities. So
hmm
you know, Indian Pakistani town. You had Chinatown. You had Pilsen, which is predominantly a Mexican neighborhood, and then you have Humboldt Park, Puerto Rican neighborhood. And it's a good thing because they maintain their culture
hmm
in those neighborhoods. But with the Filipinos in Chicago, you have your suburban Filipinos, and then you got your city Filipinos.
yeah,
And there's the Filipinos that have money and the Filipinos who don't have money. So it's like
yeah,
not only, you know, you have your classist Filipinos and you know those that for example, like I have nieces and nephews that don't even know how to speak the language, so they've pretty much assimilated into U.S. lifestyle.
yep,
Uh, but then the Filipinos I met in the city of Chicago, you know, they're more into learning more about their culture. I'm kind of generalizing, but
yeah. No, yeah,
but the thing is, it's like you could see the difference in dynamics between Phil Am city folks and then Phil Am suburban folks.
yeah, yeah. Very much like the outward look at me. I am proud of my heritage, but it's very much what I'm putting out on social media versus what I'm living every day. So,
And that's the thing.
and that, yeah,
We were like, all right, let's go eat some Mexican food. And we go to Pilsen. Like, you got so many taquerias in one block. You like, it's, you know, everyone there is from a different part of Mexico, and you know, everyone makes bomb ass food. And
yeah,
if I want Indian food, I'll go to in you know this area in Chicago where it's pretty much like little India. And so,
yeah. Well, Jesse, sorry to cut you off short. My kids are being my kids, and it is a school night. Yeah, let's pick this up again as we do. If schedules and time available, I'm sorry to cut short on this, but yeah, my kids are being what they're doing, so
oh man, problem.
appreciate you. Well, everybody, thanks for hanging out with us on a Sunday night. Like I said, this is very loose form. We're just kind of like hanging out and doing stuff, talking FMA-Nerdy because that's what we do. But yeah, thank you, Jesse, for coming on. Do you have anything coming up anytime soon to push out or?
Well, I mean, just you be on the lookout for the videos. Right now, I just released a vlog of up to date of what was going on, like why I didn't release videos between the months of February and May, and what I've been lately. But hopefully to drop one or two vlogs this upcoming week of when I was in the Philippines. So
Sweet. Well, yeah, we'll definitely share that out when that comes available. I'll throw it up on my page and yeah, get that all out. What I got going on, I am going to be talking to Sifu Mark Medieros next Saturday about FMA and MMA. So that's gonna be a fun conversation. So, well, yeah, but yeah, thanks everybody for hanging out with us on a Sunday evening. I know it's late in some places; it's getting late here, but yeah, thank
thank
you,
you.
Jesse, for being on, and thank you for your friendship and your time spent with me, my buddy. So,
Stay sane, and I'm going back to my cave.
word, homie. I'll talk to you soon. Okay.
All right, good night.
Thanks, man. I'll see you.
Yep, yep.